Once a call, it's over to you.
Hello, everybody. Can you see me?
No,
Sit down.
sit down.
Sit down. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, all right. So first of all, what an honor it is to be here. I've been here a while back, so thank you very much for asking me. Rabbi Stephen said, "You're expecting words of wisdom. I hope I can get some wisdom out. It's a bit early in the morning for me, to have wisdom. But what I wanted to do today was talk about my ancestor. That many people have got different hobbies. Some people, collect stamps, and other people I know collect paintings if you can afford it. In my family we collect rabbis. Going back, and I've done research on my heritage. Going back, it seems to be that my calling to become a rabbi seems to have come from up above. That everywhere I turn, every grandfather, great grandfather going back seems to have been a rabbi. I have lots and lots of rabbis in my family. Which makes me smile, because a friend of mine once said that he wanted to define yichus. He said, the thing about yichus is that the best bits are underground. So I have lots and lots of ancestors who are sadly underground, and there is a weight of responsibility, because I want to feel that no way am I to their level, but hopefully some things come down in the genes, that inspires me to do what I do. And one of my ancestors, and I have very, this sounds like an arrogant thing, but it's actually said from a point of humility. I happen to come from a line of not just any old rabbi, but serious players in the rabbinic world. And one of them, and I keep on, finding new rabbis, new ancestors that I'm related to. One of them, which I want to talk about today, is a rabbi called Rabbi Yefeskel Landau. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was known as the Noid Yehuda. And I am eighth direct descendant of the Noid Yehuda. So that's me over there. And I'll pass this around on my mother's side. And the words that I want to say actually is Leilui Neshamot, my parents. Nishmot, my parents. To my mother's side. My mother's let's go back. Right, my mother's grandmother was a Landau, Rosa Bienenzucht, whose grandfather's grandfather was Rabbi Yecheskel Landau. So please feel free to pass that around. And I'm going to be talking about him. Rabbi Yecheskel Landau traced his ancestry, and I've actually managed to trace it all the way back to another rabbi you might have heard of, called Rashi. Who from two of his daughters. I'm also descended from the Harshal, from the Luria family, and on another side, I also just found out that I'm also descended from the Arizal. So yeah, there's the weight of responsibilities on my shoulders, and the sister of the Ramah. So there you go. So what can I say? So a little bit about my ancestor, and as I say, I understand I've only got a few minutes to talk about this. This is a conversation for a much long conversation, and I won't bore you, but I do want to give you some pointers as to who my ancestor was. He's a very, very famous rabbi, and really he was what I would call a rabbi's rabbi. He lived from 1713 to 1793. He was born in the town or city of Apta, which is in modern day Poland. And he was a rabbi of Brody and Lampol. And eventually, which I believe, well, things with Europe, that Europe is 1 minute it's Poland, then it's Russia, and it's Poland, then it's Czechoslovakia. There's an old joke which is told about there's an old Jewish man whose house happens to lie directly on the border between Russia and Poland. And one day officials come to him and say to him, Mr. Cohen, we have some news from you. From now on, we are Polish officials. From now on, your house will always be Polish. You will always be living in Polish territory. And he said, oh, thank God. I could never stand another Russian winter. And the but that's it. But you look at the history. He was the chief rabbi in Lampo and in Yampo and in Brody, and these were very important towns or cities in 18th century Poland, I think Czechoslovakia. He came from a very, as I say, a very, gallant family. He was an only child. His father was a rabbi as well. And by the age he was 21, he was already a dayan. I mean, he was what you would call an Eloy, a child genius. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. So where did he come into? Where did he become famous? To understand his life, you need to if you know a little bit of history of what was going on in the 18th century, you've got the continuation of the Shabtai Tzvi, split that took place in the Jewish world. I'm sure we all know who Shabtai Tzvi was. You had the Sabbateans. He said he was the Messiah, born 1626, died 1676. And he really split the world. This is coming on the back of in 16. Well, you've got at the same time the Khmelnytsky massacres in Poland. So Jewry is in a very Ashkenazi Jewry is in a very, very bad way. And you've got the world that is split, the Jewish world that is split between the Sabbateans and a more extreme version of the Sabbateans called the Frankists, and they are claiming that Shabtai Tzvi is a Moshiach, and also at this time. Certainly, during the middle of the 18th century, you've also got the birth of the Haskalah movement. So you've got the Baal Shem Tov, you've got all kinds of things going on, and this is the world that Rabbi that my ancestor is born into. What's really the story that really brings him to the fore is there is a very famous huge argument between two rabbis, between the followers of two rabbis, Rab Yaakov Emden, the Avetz, and Rab Yonatan Eibenschutz, the Emden Eibenschutz controversy. What's going on? And these are two giants of the Torah world at the time. By the way, I gave this talk in another shul, and one of the rabbis said to me, "I am descended from Rabbi Yonatan Eibenschutz," which is quite funny because it's like our family are meeting again after all these generations. Rabbi Yaakov Emden accuses Rabbi Eibenschutz of being a Sabbatean and being a Frankist, and he's writing Kamayas and he's giving them to people, and there are Sabbatean, the Shabtai Tzvi writings in there, so inscriptions in there, all kinds of, Kamayas for good luck and to keep against the Ayin Hara and that sort of thing. And this absolutely sends shockwaves through the Jewish world. And so he's brought in, and he gets the job as the chief rabbi of Prague, and meanwhile he's left Brody and Lampo because he has, if I remember well, he has exposed two members of the community, in respectively, of not behaving in a very nice fashion, but early on a Tuesday morning to go into why, but accusations. By the way, he was right, and the community didn't like what he was doing. He's a really straight, posh man. He's very, very, very direct, and he didn't muck about. They didn't like that, so he goes to Prague, gets a job in Prague, which was a very, very important. It was a very, very important job at that time. You're really very, very respected. And at first, when he comes in, students mock him, and he's not had a lot of respect. And so he's asked to decide what to do with this Emden Eibenschutz controversy. And he comes up with a compromise, and he says, "Look, and he knows both men. He says, what we're going to do is we've got to find a way of quietening this down." So he gets Rav Eibenschutz to promise, whether he's guilty or not, to promise not to write any more of these. He's commanded to stop doing it, which he agrees to do. Question is, he's putting inscriptions. Are they Sabbatean or Frankish? Are they not? That's not. And he brings a halt to the controversy. When I say a halt, you always a broigus in the Jewish world never actually really finishes. It's a halt. But what happens is that he brings a halt to it, and as a result, he gets a lot of respect in the Prague community. And he's appointed as not only as he's the chief rabbi of Prague, but also the chief rabbi of the Austrian Empire. And this is also a very difficult time in Austria, because you've got the Emperor Franz Joseph and his mother. I'm not going to give a whole history lesson, but if you know it, at one time the Jews are accused of conspiring with the Prussians against the. Do you know what I'm getting at? So, you know what I'm getting at or not?
People don't like the Jews.
People don't like the Jews. Okay, so they're accused of being traitors, of a third column, and then the Empress Maria Theresa expels the Jews, and then they're allowed back in. And he very much is a very clever man. He's a monarchist, and he's able to convince her, and eventually the Jews are allowed back in. They put up the walls of the ghetto, and then he manages to convince them to bring the ghetto down. It's a rough time, but he gains respect in the community, and he becomes an authority. And from around the world, people write to him with Sheilot and Teshuvot, questions and answers. And at one point, he realizes that he needs to write his answers down. And there is a fire in his home, and he writes the answers down. Some of them are published in his lifetime, some of them by his son afterwards, one of his sons afterwards. And it's called the Noda B'Yehuda, the known one in Judah. And so he becomes a leading halachic authority, and actually in very, very orthodox circles, very learned circles, if you mention the Noda B'Yehuda, people go, "Oh, the Noda B'Yehuda," it holds some weight. So some of the rulings that he comes up with is, but we still do today, he becomes the authority on autopsies. Are we allowed to carry autopsies? Another one is, are we allowed to shave on Chol Hamoed? What's the din on shaving Chol Hamoed? And he's quite makel in his views. He's very, very principled, but he's quite on some views he's quite lenient. So, for example, an interesting one, and I'm sure Jews from around the world wish that he hadn't been overruled the following century. He says that the sturgeon is actually a kosher fish, because it has fins and scales, but in the water, a bit like swordfish, when you take it out, it's not. And so he rules, if we kept with my ancestors' rulings, caviar would be on the kosher menu, which it's good and bad in the sense of, number one, we don't have to pay caviar prices. So that's the good part. The bad thing is, you hear about caviar, beluga caviar, it would be nice. So okay, we've got cod roe instead.
Look how cheap smoked salmon has become. Caviar will become cheaper.
Exactly. It's market forces, Arnie. Exactly. So there's the rulings. So he's quite making on. And he writes quite a few commentaries. When I was many years ago, I did a postgraduate diploma at what was Jewish College, and I wrote a thesis, my thesis on the life and work of my ancestor. I'll show you an illustration. That's what he looked like. So there you go. See that? Yes, the same eyebrows. So I'm happy to share. I've got some volumes as well. This is a fascinating book. This was published on the 200th anniversary of his death, and what they did was in Prague. They rededicated his Matzeva, and also the family as well. And there's a whole story how I got this. Keep this there. I managed to get this. It was sent to me from Prague because I think when I was writing this, I contacted I heard about this reunion of the Landaus It was in 1993. That's right, when I was writing that. And eventually, I think the secretary of the community sent me this book because somebody else had it, and from a totally different way. I wrote to him, I didn't hear anything. Suddenly, somebody calls me up and says, "Are you Claude Wolf?" I said, "Yes, I've got something for you," and he refused to accept money for it. For this one, and this is another book which I've just recently purchased in Warsaw, which is fascinating. So where with regards to this is actually a really interesting book. That what it talks about is that Rabbi Yecheskel Landau was, the very epitome of a mitnager, a misnagid. He was against the Hasidic movement. I mean, but because he was sort of the old school, very much the Litvish type school, which saw in terms of the Haskalah, he said that, we've got a way of learning, and he wasn't that happy with it. On the other hand, he was a Kabbalist, and which is not that well known. And he wrote lots of approbation haskamot to books on Kabbalah. You've got to be careful when you talk about haskamot because rabbis sometimes give them. They are the forward that you have. It's like a rabbi saying this book is kosher. They don't always read the book. And that's a whole different discussion about this, which I'm not going to go into. But he would have read maybe the Akdama, the introduction, and some of the books, and he also taught Kabbalah. So I mean, I could talk and talk and talk, and I know everybody's got a place to go to. So what else do I want to say? But the thing about that I found particularly interesting about him is that although he was a rabbi, a very learned in the traditional sense, he had a lot of respect for the Haskalah. So he said that it's important for Jews to be educated. And his sons went to university. He was very well versed in secular subjects, and he would it's no, not at all. And he respected people like Moses Mendelssohn, certainly at the beginning, who was an Orthodox Jew, although his descendants, including Mendelssohn, a famous composer, worked. So he very much held the idea of, I suppose, what we call today modern orthodoxy, in that one needs to be educated both in strong Jewish education and also university education. And he very much held that. He supported the Haskalah at the beginning. When he saw what the Haskalah was turning into, which was, this was before the start of the Reform movement, but which was an attack on orthodoxy, he sort of, then said, no, that's not the case. But interestingly enough, his son, who was my ancestor, and his grandson were publishers, and they published much of his work or some of his work after his death. I'll leave you one story about my ancestor, and I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if we do this. You can questions. So a famous story, and you might know the story, but it's a fascinating story, and it's true. So. It's Pesach. I don't know exactly which year. No, it's not. So when he's a younger rabbi, and he became the rabbi of Prague in 1754, and he died in 1793. He was there for nearly 30 years. When he was a young rabbi, he's coming home from shul one morning, and he sees there's a little boy sitting there in the street, crying his eyes out. A Jewish kid, and he says to the boy, "What's wrong?" And the boy starts crying. He's crying. He's saying, "Look," he says, my mother died. My father remarried. That we are bakers, and every morning my mother sends me out with a basket of bread to sell to people, and I have to come back with an empty basket and with money. I've sold my bread, but I've lost my money. My money's gone." So he takes the boy home. He gives him food, and then he gives him, I think, I can't remember, 4, 5, 6 guilders, whatever it was. And he takes the boy and he just lets him go home. And that's what happens. Years later, when it's Pesach, it's the last night of Pesach. So going into the eighth night of Pesach. He's learning in his study, and suddenly there's a knock on the door, and his wife comes in and says, "There's somebody to speak to you." He says, "What, this time?" Yeah. Says, yes. So he says, look, bring him in. So he brings him in, and there's a man standing there he says, you don't remember me. I was the little boy that many years ago you really helped me with the bread. I want you to know, last night at our house, the bakers were there, the priest, and a number of the community was there, and you know that every year when Passover goes out, we supply the bread to the community. And I want you to know that the bakers have a plan, they've poisoned the bread. And so what's going to happen is your Passover is finishing tomorrow night. You need to tell the community that they mustn't buy the bread. So he says, thank you very much. And he goes the next morning to shul, and he says, he gets he passes a message around. There's some days before the internet and WhatsApp, and everybody goes to the main shul because there are a number of shul, and he makes an announcement. He said, I'm sorry, I've made a miscalculation. We made it. Pesach doesn't actually finish tonight, it finishes tomorrow night. I got the date wrong, right? It happens. Rabbi, we made a mistake. So what happens is that evening when they come out of shul, the bakers are standing there and, saying, buy bread, and people are just walking past them. And this is like, the big business of the year. And so the bakers go over to the police and say, I don't know what this rabbi's done, but we're losing our business. We're going to have a challah. I'm sure they won't use the word mechala, but that sort of thing. Mechala, yeah, mechala, very good, very good, very good, Keith. You've got to do something. So they go and they pick up a Rabbi Landau and they take him. They say, can you explain what this is? And he says to them, there's something wrong with the bread. So what do you mean wrong with the bread? There's nothing wrong with it. No, there's something wrong with the bread. He says, I can prove it to you. So what happened? He says, have you got a dog? He says, yeah, they bring a dog. And the whole thing is that if a dog won't eat food, it's not enough. They give the bread to the dog and the dog drops down dead. And they realize what's going on and they arrest the bakers. And this is a famous story. It's not one of those, there was a king in a castle. It's a famous story. He was totally dedicated to his community. And when the soldiers had to go out to war, he went down and he gave a bracha to the troops. Under the Queen and who were in front of the Queen. He had a prayer tefillah for the Queen. He was a rabbi's rabbi. Was exactly, he had the right balance between being an incredible mind and also having a love for the community. And I think that for me, that's, talk about inspirational. That's what we all aspire to be. We can't all be rabbis, and and we can't all have great minds.
But initials are rabbi. Everybody in initials are rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's hundreds of them.
I couldn't, yeah. That old joke about golden hair, yeah. I've got one prime minister, you got president, and you got 10 million presidents.
I've had a member, didn't you think he knew more than me?
Yeah. So, and I think especially now, and I just like to try something, especially now we're in Elul, and we're looking at ourselves, and like Rabbi Avi said about teshuvah, and thinking, not everybody's a rabbi, but I think the way he behaved towards other people, he stood by what really, if I could sort of just separate, obviously I've got subjective view, but an objective view, he was totally dedicated to the community. The way he stood by his principles, he wasn't willing to compromise, but he accepted that the world was changing. And he worked within that world. And the fact that we talk about him, that I can sit here, more than 200 years after he's passed, with pride to say he was my ancestor, is something that I carry. I carry the responsibility, and I just feel, they said that when you talk about somebody, you elevate the neshama. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you so much. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to to answer the questions. There's so much. I've thrown lots of things in. There's so much to add.
I'll say goodbye to those of you on Zoom anyway.
Thank you.
Before,
We assume the following